In this video, we'll talk about mill modeling tapped holes. After completing this step, you'll be able to use point in a sketch and create a hole feature. In Fusion 360, we're going to carry on with our mill part 1. I'm going to rename sketch 3. This is going to be our bottom slot. And I'm going to move on to creating a new set of tapped holes on the top of the part. We're going to select the top face, create a new sketch, but then we want to show our large slot sketch. We have this center line, and we're going to select all of it by holding down Control or Shift, and then we're going to project it. Note with project include that we can use P on the keyboard as well. I'm going to select OK, and now we brought this directly into our sketch. I am going to select it after I hide my large slot sketch, and I'm going to make sure that it's construction. Then I want to go to Create, and I'm going to select Create a Point. Based on our detailed drawing, we have a hole that's at the midpoint of this arc and a hole that's at the midpoint of that arc. Those are automatically fully defined. Next, we have one that's at the midpoint of each of these sides, and then we have one that appears to be at the end point of these lines. But I want to start by putting it a little inset, and we're going to validate this with dimensions. Once we've created all those points, let's go ahead and hit Escape. I'm going to use my sketch dimension between this point, and we have to take a look at our detailed drawing to better understand the locations of the holes. We have references for the center of the holes, so we know that we have holes directly at the center, and we know that we have a hole that's 50 millimeters away. So I'm going to add this dimension. I'm going to hit Enter, hit Escape to get off my dimension tool, but then I want to right-click and toggle this as a driven dimension. When we have a driven dimension in Fusion 360, this is basically a dimension check. It's measuring it, but it's not driving the location of that point. So I'm going to snap it to the end point, and note that this gives us a 50 millimeter value. This tells me that I can take all of these points and I can snap them to those endpoint locations, and this gives me the location I need. This also helps me better understand and identify the dimensions in the detailed drawing, because that tells me that those are intended to be at the ends of these large arcs. Now that I have those positions in place, I'm going to finish the sketch. Also note that I want to rename sketch 4 to be my hole locations. Now that we have our hole locations, I'm going to go to Create and the Hole tool. There is a placement option that allows us to use from sketch multiple holes, and we can use these sketch points as our locations. Don't worry about the preview on the screen just yet. It's defaulting to a very large hole, and we're going to modify those parameters before we hit OK. Now we want to define the size hole that we need. Remember, we're using a tapped hole, and we're going to go down and select the size before we modify any of the other parameters. We're going to go to a 5 millimeter hole, and then we can select the tap. It's an M5 by 0.8. Now that we have the M5 by 0.8 defined, we need to define how deep the hole is. By default, it's coming up at 50 millimeters, but we know that it's a 15 millimeter depth. I'm going to add the value 15, and I want to double check all of my other settings. Right now, the bottom of the hole is using the angle for a drill point. That's exactly what we want, and a 118-degree drill. So all of these values are going to produce the correct hole, noting that we're tapping the entire 15 millimeter deep. When we get to manufacture this hole, there are some considerations that we need to keep in mind. The taper of the drill bit is going to be below the overall distance of the hole. However, a tap that we use is likely going to be tapered on the end, and the last few threads are not going to be valid. So we need to understand the intent of the drawing. If we need 50 millimeters of thread completely down to that bottom of that hole, we're probably going to have to drill a little bit deeper. But from here, we can say OK, and now we've made those tapped holes. It's important to note that by default, we have an appearance on the hole. If we needed to have physical holes, we can modify the parameter that allowed it to be modeled. This would create physical holes in the design, but when you're manufacturing, really all you need is the minor diameter so we can drill the hole and use a tap. Now that we've created all the holes in the design, let's go ahead and save before moving on.